Today on Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making cookie dough ice cream. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. This is also a no-bake and no-churn recipe, no ice cream maker required. We'll be making my favorite version of ice cream, cookie dough. Now, of course, we want this cookie dough to be safe to eat, which means we will not be using eggs, and we are going to be heat treating our flour. Perhaps you have heard that there have been some cases of E. coli being found in raw or uncooked flour, so we are going to heat treat this. Perhaps you've seen me do this in other recipes where I cook it in the oven, but this is such a small amount of flour, it's just 1/3 cup, so we're going to quickly do this in the microwave. I'm going to heat it for 30 seconds, give it a stir, and take the temperature. And you'll probably notice that the flour is a little bit clumpy after it's been heated. This is normal. We will address that a little bit later on. So we'll go ahead and take the temperature using an instant read thermometer. And what we are looking for is a temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter. So I'm actually reading 165 degrees now, but if yours isn't after 30 seconds, just pop it back in the microwave in 10-second intervals, stirring in between until you do get that temperature. Now, we don't want to use this while it's warm, so we're going to set this aside to cool while we prepare the rest of our cookie dough. Grab yourself a mixing bowl, medium or large sized. And to this, we are going to add 4 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter. And we'll also be adding 1/4 cup of firmly packed light brown sugar. You can use dark brown sugar instead if you prefer. It will just make the cookie dough a little bit richer, which is not a problem. It's your preference. Now, we are also going to be adding just a tablespoon of condensed milk to this cookie dough as well. Now, we are going to need the rest of the condensed milk just a little bit later on. But for now, what this is going to be doing is the condensed milk adds sweetness to the cookie dough without adding extra grit that adding additional sugar would do. Go ahead and scrape it out of the tablespoon. Now, cookie dough by nature is a little bit gritty, right? Because the sugar hasn't had the opportunity to dissolve. So you want some grit there, but by using condensed milk, we can add sweetness without adding extra grain so that the cookie dough is nice and palatable and quite enjoyable. So save your condensed milk, we'll need it in a little bit. And then for flavoring for our cookie dough, we'll add just a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract and about an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. This is just table salt or fine sea salt, either will work well. Next, we're going to cream our ingredients together. You could certainly use a stand mixer for this step, but since it's just such a small amount of dough, I prefer to just use my electric hand mixer instead. So we'll go ahead and cream everything together. And once everything is looking creamy and nicely combined, I like to crank my heat up to high and then I'll beat it for another minute, which is also going to help dissolve those sugars a little bit and make the cookie dough nice and creamy. But just for the record, I firmly stand by the idea that cookie dough should have grit to it. That's just part of the experience. Okay, so this is nice and smooth, so let's check on our flour. Now it's important that our flour be cooled completely before we add it to this mixture, because if it's warm, what it's going to do is it's going to melt those sugars that we've been talking about, and it's going to give you a really greasy cookie dough. You don't want that, so make sure it doesn't feel warm at all. Now, we've also discussed the fact that heat treating your flour tends to make it a little clumpy. Maybe you saw that while I was mixing it up. So we are going to eliminate those clumps by running it through a sifter or a fine mesh sieve. Just going to pour this right in. And most likely your flour will have stuck to the bowl some. Just scrape it out. We need to get the cookie dough to its proper consistency and to get it to cling together. So we don't want to lose any of that. We'll just shake through what we can. And there are those clumps I was telling you about. We should be able to just press them through the strainer. If you have a couple stray pieces, no big deal, you can just toss those out. All right, this is looking pretty good. So now I'm going to grab my little spatula from earlier and I'll mix everything together. You could do this with your stand mixer, but it's, again, just a small amount. So I'm just going to do it by hand. Now we have a lonely stand mixer and a lonely hand mixer. And once all that flour is absorbed, of course, we need some chocolate chips because this is chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. I have 4 tablespoons of mini chocolate chips. I do recommend mini. They are much more pleasant to bite into when they're frozen than regular sized chocolate chips. So we'll just add these and stir them until everything is nicely distributed. All right, next you'll want to grab yourself a wax paper or parchment paper lined baking sheet. You don't need a large one. And we are going to portion out our cookie dough. Now, I like to portion out the cookie dough into 1 teaspoon sized balls. I have a 1.5 teaspoon sized cookie scoop I'm going to use for this. I won't fill it up all the way. And I will try to remember to link to this in the recipe description. But if you don't have a cookie dough scoop this small, you can just use a pair of spoons. You can use a regular teaspoon and scrape the dough out that way. This is nice and easy, but it's not the only way to get your cookie dough scoops. Now I'll scoop the dough and I'll just drop it on my baking sheet over here. You could use a plate instead, that would be fine. And if you are some kind of perfectionist, you could take the cookie dough and roll it between your palms to make it a nice round ball. It's pretty sticky though, and so long as the cookie dough is nicely clumped together and in round-ish shapes, that is going to work just fine for your ice cream. It doesn't need to be perfect. Let's go ahead and finish portioning this. You don't want to make these cookie dough pieces too large because they can be a little bit difficult to scoop or to bite into. So try to keep them about a teaspoon or even a little bit smaller in size. Now this cookie dough is pretty sticky, as you saw. So before we add it into our ice cream, we are going to place it in the freezer to chill. This is going to keep the cookie dough from smearing when we add it into our ice cream. If we added it just like this at room temperature, you would end up with a streaky ice cream full of cookie dough streaks instead of cookie dough scoops. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but my preference is to have traditional bites of cookie dough distributed throughout the ice cream. They won't need to chill for very long, so I just pop them in the freezer while I am preparing my ice cream. So once we've scooped all our cookie dough, we can just take this over to the freezer where we will chill it while we prepare our ice cream. Now for the ice cream, you are going to need 2 cups of very cold heavy cream, and we're going to add this to a large mixing bowl. Now you'll notice I'm just using a glass mixing bowl today, but if it's very warm where you are, or if you've ever struggled with whipping cream in the past, I would recommend grabbing yourself a metal mixing bowl instead, popping it in the freezer for 15 minutes before you try to whip it. It will just be a little bit of extra insurance to help your cream whip properly. Now once again, you'll want to grab yourself an electric hand mixer, and we will beat the cream starting on medium speed, gradually increase to high speed, and beat until we have thick, fluffy peaks. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Let's take a peek. Yes, so you can see this is thick, billowy. If you lift your spatula out of the mixture, the peak that forms holds its shape. It doesn't fold back in on itself. It resembles like whipped topping you would get at the store. This is perfect. So we'll go ahead and set this aside and then grab a separate mixing bowl. And I'm just gonna clean off my spatula, and I'm going to use this to scrape the rest of my condensed milk into this mixing bowl. And I do want to get all of that condensed milk in there. And as you can see, I don't mind getting a little bit of the whipped cream mixed in with the condensed milk, but I wouldn't want to take this the other way. I wouldn't want to use a spatula covered in condensed milk and put it in the cream before I whipped it, if that makes sense. Okay, so then to flavor the ice cream additionally, we are going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And we are also going to add a pinch of salt. I recommend fine sea salt. If you don't have that, table salt will work well. It's just under an 1/8 teaspoon. Now we'll mix these ingredients together until they're nicely combined. We'll bring back our whipped cream. And just go ahead and drizzle that condensed milk mixture into the cream. It smells so good. Vanilla extract. Delicious. It smells delicious. Don't eat it though, not by itself. Now for this step, you do not want to use an electric mixer of any kind. We don't want to overbeat our whipped cream, so we're going to use a spatula to gently fold the ingredients together until we have a nice uniform mixture. And this will be our ice cream base. We want the 2 bowls of ingredients to be nicely incorporated. That way we have a nice smooth ice cream. And this is looking pretty good. So now we want to grab our cookie dough from the freezer, and we can start adding this to our ice cream. Now you can see that this cookie dough that was super sticky is now very easy to pick up, even though it's only been in the freezer for like 5 minutes. Now I'm only going to add about half of the cookie dough at first, just scatter it over the top. And then I'm going to gently fold the cookie dough in before adding the rest. Now, of course, we also will be adding some chocolate chips to this as well. It adds a nice extra punch of chocolate. I have a 1/4 cup of mini chocolate chips here. Again, mini, not regular sized. And I'm going to dump most of them in, but I'm going to save a few for the top. Now we'll fold everything together because we want the chocolate chips and the cookie dough to be nicely distributed. And if you've made my no churn cookie dough in the past, you know that I like to freeze it in a bread pan. It just works very nicely and is pretty similar in size to a carton of ice cream that you'd get at the store. Now I always line my bread pan with either parchment paper or wax paper. We'll go ahead and pour our ice cream right on in there. Use your spatula to smooth out the surface because it's going to freeze pretty much however you put it in the pan. It's going to keep that shape. And then we'll take those chocolate chips that we reserved from earlier and we'll just scatter them over the surface just for an extra touch of color. So now we're going to take this over to the freezer. I do like to cover mine with plastic wrap before I do this, even though plastic wrap never cooperates with me and is something of my nemesis. And the ice cream will need to chill for at least 4 to 6 hours before you can enjoy it. I prefer to chill mine overnight. Now I did, of course, prepare a batch of ice cream last night, so we can go ahead and dig in. Let's take a look at that. So this is ready to enjoy, so let's go ahead and dig in. Now, one thing to keep in mind with no churn ice cream is that it melts a little bit faster than classic ice cream and it's a little bit softer than the regular ice cream you may be used to from the store. However, the cookie dough can make it a little bit difficult to scoop, so if you run into any issues, just run your ice cream scoop under hot or warm water before digging in. And that is how easy it is to make homemade no churn cookie dough ice cream. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe, and if you try this one, please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. That is so good.